Okay, good evening. And on behalf of the Global Ethics Institute and the German Informatics Society, I warmly welcome you to this evening's web talk on ethical decision-making in the digital age. My name is Ann-Kathrin and I'm a former student of the University of Tübingen, and I'm more than happy to moderate the upcoming roundtable on this important topic. I studied Islamic studies and politics years ago, and I'm now in Berlin working in the field of digital policies, amongst others, as the chairwoman of LOA, the Association for Liberal Internet Policy. Like myself, more and more people are now involved in discussions about digitalization of AI, even without a background in computer science. The federal German president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, just started last year the annual Church Congress, his dialogue about democracy, ethics, and digitalization. And also in Tübingen, we have a broad and important discourse about ethics and technology, especially because of the Cyber Valley, Europe's largest cluster on artificial intelligence. So Tübingen is not only famous for this new cluster, but also for its long history and recognition of religious studies, Islamic studies, as well as Christian theology. That is one of the reasons why the Global Ethics Institute was founded in Tübingen, based on the idea of global ethics by Professor Hans Küng. The perfect combination to write a book that brings new impulses to the broad dialogue we need to have. Kritik of Digital Reason, this is the book, is the name of it, and the director of the Global Ethics Institute, Professor Ulrich Hemel, just published it, and I'm happy to have him here this evening for our discussion. He will soon start with a short impulse for our discussion, as well as my other three guests, whom I will then briefly introduce to you before their respective impulses. And after that, we will have a moderator's discussion, ethical decision-making in the digital age. And you, dear guests, are warmly welcome to ask your questions to our panelists afterwards. Please write them in the tool of our GoToWebinar on your right side, probably. And yeah, I will ask them, our guests, later on. And without further ado, I'd like to invite Professor Hemel. I don't know if he's now able to switch on his camera or just by phone with us. But
unfortunately, only by voice.
Well, we have a picture of you here, and I will just briefly introduce you to our guests. Professor Dr. Ulrich Hemel, as I said, he's the director of the Global Ethics Institute and the deputy spokesperson of the Ethics Advisory Board of the Cyber Valley, Stuttgart-Tübingen. He is a Catholic theologian and the founder of the Institute for Social Strategy, a management consultant, manager, and entrepreneur. And his research and work focuses on ethics in companies, economic anthropology, and ethics of artificial intelligence. And Ulrich Hemel is also a member of the European Academy of Sciences and Arts and president of the Federation of Catholic Entrepreneurs. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for the very interesting book, and I'm happy to hear your remarks for us today.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, you can see that we are in a digital world, and we start with something which does not work. But we are human beings, and as human beings, we are really flexible, and we have something which in my book I called the catastrophic competence, which really means that we are able to ruin the world while originating catastrophes, but we are also very flexible when we have the small challenges and catastrophes of everyday life. So this is something. And if we look at life, we would also like to see what kind of reality is it if we talk about the digital world. This was one of the questions I had when discussing the critique of digital reason, because not the whole world is digital, we know that, but what really is it? Well, when I discussed this point, I had an apple on my desk, and this apple, I can eat the apple, but it's myself. If I share a digital picture, I can share it with the whole world. But of course, nobody would smell the smell of the apple, the odor, the flavor, and I cannot share it physically. So this means that while changing levels of reality, we have always of reality. I can share it with the whole world, but we also lose something in the reality. Smell the flavor, which is important. So this is one thing in the digital world, and it's not so important if we look what happens with us. The second thing, which I think is so important, is that we all are held of our digital ignorance. Digital ignorance is a human condition of its own. We all know that we cannot know everything, but with the explosion of knowledge in the digital world, we can know every time less of the world than before. This means we have to learn how to navigate with our own digital ignorance, half knowledge, and also with our real profound knowledge. This means we come to a third point, how to deal with power. Who has the power to decide? If we say ethical decision making, what kind of decision? Is it a bank loan? Is it buying a car? Is it inviting somebody for a party? Is it selecting a navigation system? Who has the power? Which perspective is important? Which context? Short, medium, long-term interest? So there are a lot of questions behind our topic of today. And I think in the end, machines can help us. But in the end, we should control the machines, because the complexity of control is something we can do as human beings. And the complexity of control is not proportionate to the complexity of the controlled system. You can easily understand that if I start my car, I simply push a button, but what is behind that is far more complex. And this is somehow similar also in the digital world. Just as a first input, I have more questions than answers, but this is what I think we should do to open up a dialogue on artificial intelligence and ethics in the digital age. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hemel. And as a second guest, I'd like to invite Mila Gorecki here on my digital stage. Welcome. She's a student assistant at Max-Planck-Institut for Intelligent Systems and a student of the International Master's Program on Machine Learning at the University of Tübingen. And she's the winner of this year's Women in STEAM Award for her bachelor thesis. In it, she dealt with the identification of sources of unfairness in algorithmic decisions and the question of how their effects can be mitigated. So I'm very interested in your remarks and your input for our discussion. Mila Gorecki, your stage is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. So as you already said, I'm a student assistant at the Max-Planck-Institut for Intelligent Systems and also do my master's in the new machine learning master in Tübingen. And I would like to give you a short introduction of my background and why I might, or what I'm giving to this discussion today. So I'm mainly interested in the interaction between humans and machines, and not only how they directly interact, but also how humans and machines, how the dynamics between those two entities are. I have a background in cognitive science and computer science. So in cognitive science, I wrote a bachelor thesis on gesture recognition for mobile robots, and then turned in computer science to, as Ann-Kathrin Riedel already said, to a project on automated decision-making with regard on fairness, or with looking at fairness of automated decision-making. As we have seen in the last years, the use of technology increased in all aspects of our everyday life, and so did also the number of decisions which are either made by algorithms or influenced by algorithms. And so I wanted to have a look at the dynamics between decisions that are made in social contexts, decisions that are made on humans by machines. It's quite widespread. The idea is quite widespread that machines are, due to the involvement of math and not humans, brought in a way to neutrally decide who might get a loan, who might get a car, who might get into college, or who might be hired for a specific job. However, this is a huge misconception, and in the last years it has been found that algorithmic systems can not only recreate human bias, but also reinforce human biases. So within my thesis, I explored different approaches to tackle those biases and to approach fairness in algorithmic decisions. And what I found within this project are that there are multiple sources that can introduce bias into the system. There are on the one side biases that are mainly originating from the data. So they're either encoded in the data, like long-term historical biases and stereotypes that might be encoded in specific, for example, in texts or in specific roles that men and women had in society. There might be introduced by the feature selection, so by selecting which aspects of our problem we are looking at and what our goal is. So whether we are trying to measure success, what a good employee is. These decisions can also introduce bias into the system. And then there's on the other side the algorithm and the evaluation of the algorithm that can further introduce biases into the system. Those are the two main sources, but then we should always have in mind that those two things are not isolated, but rather interact with each other. So we have feedback loops between the decisions the algorithm does onto the humans that might be that might generate new data for the next system. So concluding from my thesis, I found that fairness is a problem which cannot be solved by technology and definitely needs an interdisciplinary discourse between people from all different backgrounds, as it is a very non-trivial problem. And studying fairness in machine learning brought up a big number of several new questions to me. So there's also the question of who takes responsibility for those decisions that an algorithm or an algorithmic system might take. Which decisions should actually be automated, and that is something that not only computer scientists like me can decide, but we have to decide as a whole society. And then we might also have in mind that although the digitalization is rapidly taking over all aspects of our lives, there might be solutions that are totally non-technically and provide better solutions to the problems, not the symptoms that we are discovering in the interaction between humans and machines. So with this, I wanted to show that there are many questions still open in the area of fairness or in the area of interaction between humans and machines, and look forward to touch some of them in the discussion.
Thanks a lot, Ms. Gorecki. And as the third person, I'd like to invite Alexander von Gernler here on my digital stage. He is the Vice President of the Society for Informatics, and he's the Technical Ambassador and Head of Research at Genua, a specialist company for IT security. And he has a great personal interest in data protection, IT security, privacy, and of course, ethics. I'm happy to hear your input for today.
Thank you, Anne-Kathrin, for that warm introduction, and thanks for the warm reception. I'm happy to be here, and I'm very happy to see that the Global Ethics Institute is addressing the ethical challenges that come along with the advent of artificial intelligence. I think that this discussion will be fueled on a high level, guaranteeing by the Ethics Institute that the discussion will be held with the right philosophical resources at hand. And to be more concrete in my input statement, I want to feature the steps and actions that in my institution, the German Informatics Society, have been undertaken and put to work in about the last 2 years. The German Informatics Society is an institution that aims to bring together academia as well as practitioners, and we try to bring first steps into action that help to get a feeling for the subject that we're dealing with. So I want to make 3 points here. First of all, we performed a study on the regulation of algorithms for the German Federal Ministry of Justice and Consumer Protection. The objective of that study was to analyze the possibilities for legislators that they have for the legal design of the development and application environment of algorithms. In a nutshell, there have been some main insights, namely transparency and traceability, respectively confirmability of AI. After that episode, we got into contact with the German Federal Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs. And they basically have been interested in going deeper into the questions of transparency and testing/auditing of AI systems. And this led to the setup of a research project called Feasibility of Testing and Auditing of AI-based Systems, in which we have been involved. And the project works on a cascade of layers, namely starting from use cases, going to technical standards, to legal requirements, to test and certification, to testing methods, and finally, because it was from the Federal Ministry, of course, policy recommendations. And as a third point, I want to stress that the German Informatics Society has a very active technical committee on AI that works on several academic and practical questions regarding the topic. And one initiative I especially want to mention is they coined recently the 10 questions about the future of AI. So in every field, at some point there was someone who puts up leading questions for the next years, and I think that is what the initiative did here. I think I'll leave it here. I would have more on the history of AI and expectation horizons, but I think I'll bring this in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot. And our fourth guest, Peter Dayan, I welcome you on my digital stage. He moved to Tübingen in 2018 and became the director of the Max-Planck-Institut for biological cybernetics. And his research there focuses on decision-making processes in the brain, the role of neuromodulators, as well as neuronal malfunction and psychiatric diseases. He has long worked in the interface between natural and engineered systems for learning and choice, and is also regarded as a pioneer in the field of artificial intelligence. I'm very happy to have you here, and looking forward to your opening remarks.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm very grateful for the chance to contribute to this debate. But unfortunately, I have to apologize for not speaking German, so therefore I was unable so far to read Professor Hemel's book. I'm looking forward to learning German enough to do that. I'd like to address three topics which particularly concern natural and artificial decision making. So in a sense, these are I'm going to talk about two problems and one potential partial saving grace. The first problem I like to call computational psychiatry for computers, which is a topic of a recent review by my colleague Eric Schultz and myself. So computational psychiatry is a nascent field that started from the idea that we now know a great deal about how humans should and do make decisions. And so we should be able to leverage that to understand how this can break down in psychological and neurological disease. The hope is to provide psychiatry with a firmer foundation. But an observation is that various problems arise not what you might call organically, but rather in response to ignorance about a nasty, brutish, and labile or changing world. Optimal patterns of behavior in such environments exhibit significant path dependence. They get stuck in what looks like to an outside observer as being maladaptive. Actually, I think this relates to some of the things that Mila talked about too. AI devices will suffer exactly the same issue. So it's great. We can maybe talk about treatment, and nebulous ideas about treatment in the discussion. The second problem is what in English is known rather crudely as the difference between a cock-up and a conspiracy theory. The issue here is how concerned we should be about a sort of super intelligence, something that Professor Hemel, I think, talks about in his book, that in virtue of having misspecified goals, so for instance, in Nick Bostrom's example, to make as many paperclips as possible, will cause arbitrarily bad problems or outcomes for us. I think we do have to be worried, but much more about non-robustness and incompetence, the computational catastrophe that Professor Hemel referred to. Most of the computational problems that we would like to solve properly are radically intractable. They defeat both humans and machines alike. So heuristics and shortcuts are necessary for machines just as much as for us. It's in these heuristics that the problem lies. And the partial solution to the catastrophe relying on humans is dangerous too. Human decisions are ultimately barely more explicable, for instance, than machine ones. Colin Cameron has this fantastic saying that we're like monkeys with a good press secretary. We're far better at finding apparently rational explanations for our decisions than we are at making those decisions rationally in the first place. The potential partial saving grace concerns the issue of self and other awareness, rendered as sort of metacognition or theory of mind in cognitive science. The forms of these that we need in terms of decision making are qualitatively less than the full solutions to what you might think of as the hard problem of consciousness. They're the soft solutions to things like uncertainties about the consequences of choices, or the degree of preferences between options, or the sort of recursive thinking that permeates pragmatics, my beliefs about your beliefs about my beliefs about you, and so forth. There's huge interest in capturing these in AI systems too. So there's not only, so these systems will be endowed with some of the mechanisms to be unsure about themselves. So in some, the points that Professor Hemel has raised are urgent and compelling. I focus on decision making, but obviously the questions of identity, ownership, and trust, and so forth, are also very compelling, very interesting to hear about those in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dayan, and I welcome everyone now to our stage, and I would like to start with our discussion. So please turn your cameras on. Yeah, perfect. And I'd like to start with a very soft question. So there are a lot of working groups and boards on ethics, and I am also a member of a working group on ethics and digitalization. And some say we talk too much about ethics and we prevent too many business models because of that. What do you think about that? Do we talk too much about ethics? Is our talks like these today obsolete?
If you ask somebody working at the Global Ethics Institute, the answer, of course, is no, because we don't talk enough about that. Because really, we must know and understand how should we behave, and how should we behave in the interaction between humans, and now, which is new, in the interaction between humans and machines, and even considering the interaction machines and machines. And this is really a new perspective. And one thing is very clear. I'm talking now as a white male person of a certain age, which is a completely different perspective than talking as a 10 years old, female, near teenager, out of Africa or some other place. So the difference of perspective is something deeply inherent in our human condition. And we have to reflect how can we create conditions of fairness in a context of a digital world where we, in an application, normally can only select one perspective. How can we achieve fairness under such difficult conditions? In these terms, the question is new. In other terms, it's an old question, but we have to solve it.
I think into Professor Hemel's view. So one of the issues that people like Bostrom bring up is that there's very urgent to talk about these ethical issues now because of the rate of the pace of improvement and speed of a change of these systems. So they're going to take us over in a few years if we're not careful. But do you think that the time issue got particularly at this point?
Was for me the question. Yeah.
Can you repeat the last, because it was not clear, the last transmission?
So the question was the issue of time. So one reason to talk a lot about ethics now is that the danger that certain people think is that computers are running away from us. So if we don't talk about it now, it's too late soon. I wondered about your
Yeah, sure. Well, of course, now here you refer to the question of the superintelligence, of the really superior beings, and so on. But this is something, I think, where we have a learning process before us. We all are now acquainted to the simple fact that cars can drive much more rapidly than even the best human person can run. So a good runner is even worse than a very moderate car. So we also have to learn that for certain cognitive performances, digital software, digital applications, digital machines are superior to us, but they don't define us completely. I'm not only composed of my brainware, of my personal intelligence. I'm also composed of my memories, of my plans, of my self-awareness, of my personality in a body. So these are the differences. But what is really new is, I think we don't have to be afraid, but we have to learn to distinguish human beings not only from animals, which is difficult enough, but also from digital machines or even digital beings. This is the new challenge. I'm not afraid of cognitive superiority as long as it is confined to a specific application. So this is what usually is the weak AI, but we will go and have steps also to the strong AI. This is one of the challenges. I know that. Thank you.
May someone add something to this question? Otherwise, I have another one. So maybe just for our German guests, because as I said, our federal president, Mr. Steinmeier, started a dialogue with the public regarding ethics and AI, and also our German Bundestag with the Enquete Commission on AI just published their results. Do you follow these dialogues and their outputs, and what do you think of them? Do you think it's a good way to start this dialogue as the parliament or as the president? And what do you think about the outcomes so far?
If I may, I would broaden the question somehow and emphasize on the necessity that I see for a big and broad societal discussion about these new ethics, not only for a set of politicians or perhaps the European Commission or so, which is very important, of course, in its own right, for example, I very much loved the fact that Süddeutsche Zeitung had a series on artificial intelligence from various people over several months, and each weekend or something, you could inform yourself about a new contribution to the societal debate. And I think because I also work in the economy, acceptance and trust are very important if you bring some new system to the people. Either it's a car, I mean, car was mentioned as an example, but also, and worse, with AI, I would not so much use the car analogy, but rather the voting one. So if you have a voting computer, then you have to trust that the voting computer is doing the right thing. Instead, well, in comparison with some kind of paper ballot, where you can start in the morning watching people putting paper in the ballot, and afterwards someone is pouring all the papers on the table, and there is no huge science in counting the votes. So this is a system you can trust because you are able to fully grasp it. And I would compare AI to some kind of reasoning much more like the voting computer. So you need to trust it somehow. And I think we're far from the point where society, at least in Germany, is able to understand and fully trust AI, also with respect to its expectation horizons.
May I partly contradict?
Sure.
Okay. Yes, of course, I understand that. And I know that calculation, of course, is the strong side. Other application, a bank loan. If in that bank loan you have, and this was the input which you had from Mila Gorecki before, even that bank loan, for example, you have your living quarter as a quarter where people, generally speaking, are not so much entitled or positive for getting a bank loan. The simple fact of living there will put into danger your bankability, so to say. This is a big challenge. Of course, the example is a little bit simple, but the point is we must have a big discussion on the premises, on the first positions, on the perspectives we do have. And of course, we do have something which I call invisible decisions. What is an invisible decision? If you take a face recognition software and you test the face recognition software only, let me say, in a wall where you have ladies between white ladies between 35 and 55. Of course, the program will not be as good with black young men aged 20. So there is a bias, and sometimes we know the bias, like in this case. Sometimes we don't know that, because sometimes we take invisible decisions because we don't know which kind of decision we take. We are not aware because we think it's natural to think like we do. And this is a big challenge, and I think we should focus on that. What kind of invisible decision is enclosed in the software of digital applications? And so, yes, they can calculate, but on which premises? So this is a little bit more complex than the polling and the voting machine, but I think it is something we have to discuss as a society.
Yeah, please go on, Mr. Dayan.
So I agree with that. And on the voting, I would say, of course, the hanging chads tell us that paper ballots are not without their problems as well. On the issue about the invisible decisions that you mentioned, I think that's very important. We think about other cases where ethics are critical, like medical ethics, for instance. So we have in that instance, we provide to a profession the means of essentially regulating itself, because the outside world is not capable of understanding what those medical questions are. And there are a lot of implicit decisions that we're essentially giving to doctors, like a radiologist looking at a scan. There's some information they're using, but they perhaps probably cannot explain in a very in words exactly what that information is. So as a society, we decide that there are professions where we allow experts essentially to regulate themselves. And so AI presumably is going to be essentially is moving in the same sort of direction, as that we haven't got the regulational mechanisms sorted out.
May I contradict again?
Yeah, of course.
Possible? No, I think it's an important point. You're completely right. But look, the medical profession is united by what we call the Hippocratic Oath. They have one common target, which is the health of individuals. But I have never discovered one common target in, let me say, programming people, in software engineers. There is no common target. Rather, we do have interests, and interests short-term, medium-term, long-term. Interests, whose interests? Personal interests, company interests, state interests. So the variety of interests in the real world really is reflected also in the software world. This is why we need more precaution than even in the medical professions, which are united by one goal, which is the health of their patients, which is also the Hippocratic Oath. And I don't know any Hippocratic Oath for, let me say, software engineers, at least nothing which works. Sorry for contradicting.
I might contradict.
Yeah, maybe there are a lot of questions or topics we now touched upon. I'd like to talk on later. We have 1 hour still left, so I'd like to go back to my initial question on the broad public discourse. So maybe Ms. Gorecki, did you follow what the Enquete Commission published, and do you think they are really addressing all these topics we now touched upon on several times, like about this topic you addressed also in your opening remarks on bias, and that we need to do something against it? Or really, do you have the feeling that our policymaker understood the problem we have here so far?
So regarding this fairness problem, at least, I have the feeling that it's coming more and more to the people's awareness, as especially from the US, we hear a lot about algorithmic unfairness, or at least I in my bubble hear a lot about algorithmic unfairness. So I feel like it's getting picked up. Those topics are discussed, for example, in the AI enquete. But of course, the outcomes are still not concrete enough. They give like a very broad framework, but from my perspective, are not concrete enough to directly translate them or directly transform them into, let's say, a specific Hippocratic oath we as computer scientists would have to sign.
Okay, thank you. And before we really dig deeper into the topics you already touched upon, we all of you said that we need a broader discourse and more disciplines who are involved in the discourse, especially when we want to talk about fairness and stuff like that, and bias. And Professor Hemel, you mentioned all the different kinds of people from all over the world. Mr. von Gernler, you mentioned the series in the Süddeutsche Zeitung that try to educate people about this topic. Do you think there need to be more education, especially for people at every age? So, for example, Finland, the government of Finland introduced the program, maybe you heard about it, Elements of AI, is a tool or something like a webinar for every Finnish person so that they can learn about the fundamental basics about AI. Do you think we need more education about what AI, machine learning, algorithmic system, and so on are, so that we really can have a good discourse? So, because not everyone can say something about this topic, but do people really understand what AI is? So what do you think about that?
If I may, I think in every time of ages of humanity, society has always had the need to educate themselves and mostly their offspring about the things in life that to this age have been important to know. So if you go back to medieval ages, it was a different skill set and a different way of understanding the world, but you certainly had to somehow understand how that world was seen and which skills were important. And following that argument, yes, of course, I think when you're surrounded by digital platforms more and more, and algorithms all around you making decisions based on the way you live, or the location you live, or the money you are able to spend, or your political opinion, or whatever, I think it's just an equality of weapons, or a kind of fairness towards the single subject that they understand what is happening around them, and so they can react to that. I wouldn't even say we can reach a level of equal fairness, because the other party holds so much data about you and your other well, fellow citizens, that equality cannot be spoken of. But without awareness, yes, we're all blind.
May I add something to it? Yes, I would like to add something to that. Because what we experience right now really is an epochal turn. It's a different era, like the transition from nomads to agriculture. Why? Because we are all going into a hybrid form of existence. And I think even in our identity, we are threefold. We are the physical persons, as we are and move, and everybody knows us, but all of us are already now digitally extended persons. This is my second self, my second persona is this myself with my smartphone, because here I have all my personal data and so on, and even it is partly recognized as part of our personality. And the third thing is what you mentioned right now, is that we have a third kind of self, a third persona, which is our cloud self, so to say, because there are elements of us, knowledge of us in the cloud, and it is not accessible to us. In former times, psychologists said this is the unconscious or subconscious, but I think we need more transparency, and we need more, as you say, equality of conditions, which means we must strengthen the rights of the individuals in front of big digital companies, because we should own our own data. This is a strong point. Maybe we can go on to this point a little bit later.
I fully agree.
Maybe, if I may, I'd like to add also, because you said we're connected with our smartphones. I think that belongs also regarding the state when it comes to spy software or something like that by the state, or what they want to see of us. So, but Mr. Dayan or Mrs. Gorecki, someone of you, I think, wanted to add something. Who would like to start?
So I think the education, of course, is we educated, so obviously education is very important, but the field as a whole doesn't understand how many of these advanced mechanisms actually work. So you say, take some of these very big deep neural networks, for instance, which are the things which have revolutionized aspects of AI in the recent years. So there's this very active research area to try and understand how these mechanisms actually operate. And so therefore education, although it's a fantastic thing to do, we don't even have the answers. The technical field doesn't have the answers, let alone being able to convey them in a way that everybody can understand.
That's correct.
Well, yeah, please. Hello?
No, Ms. Gorecki, she wanted to add something also before.
Okay, yeah, I basically just wanted to, so basically I'm agreeing with all of you that I think the main answer is, well, of course we need more education and we need communication of what scientists are doing or what they are working on, also in order to allow people to trust in the technology that they face in everyday life. I only wanted sorry, to extend this to not only educate people more on AI, which we were focusing now mainly on, but also educate people more to understand digitalization and enable people to work with the digital tools they have at hand. So like the smartphone, for example, we already said it's now until now it got part of our identity and it got part of what we are supposed to have. So I would like to make the point that we also have to make sure that everyone gets access to this new kind of world, to this new digital world, yes. Starting with the offspring, but also talking about people from different socioeconomic backgrounds.
Yeah. I think this is a really important point, because you are talking now about what we should call digital participation or digital inclusion. And this is a really important point, and it brings us to the issue that the digital world also addresses some social questions, the question of justice, the question of equality. So if we don't have equal access, we do have a problem. Look at Corona times, what we had, the remote schooling really was addressed differently in well-off households and families. Course a challenge, and I would not only say make the point of digital education, which is so important, but I would also include the point, this is with the former part of the discussion on digital human rights. We need digital human rights, and I think this is important. You mentioned, Anne-Catherine, the state, and we need that. In Venezuela, for example, we had discussion between Mr. Guaido and Mr. Maduro, and the one was confirmed by the parliament, but the other one had in his hands the geo-blocking. So whenever they tried to make a demo or a manifestation via Facebook and so on, it was blocked, geo-blocking. So as a citizen of that state, I would like to have an international digital court, international cyber court, where I say, okay, you state offended my digital rights. I know this is far away, but still it makes things transparent. In the same sense, I think against the state, we need something like a cyber arms convention which bans them, because we banned nuclear arms. Why can't we ban cyber arms? Because we do need a concept of responsibility, and the responsibility is human responsibility. Machines are not responsible in the same sense. This is different. So I think we need this part of the political discussion, but also the part of the social discussion, which goes into the direction of digital inclusion, digital participation. But this means we need to discuss what exactly is the content of digital human rights. This is a new question in that sense.
Thank you. Mr. von Gernler, you wanted to add something too, right?
Yeah, thank you. 2 points. One is a reply to Peter Dayan. If I got you right, that you said that education about advancements of science, where we don't even understand the problem fully or don't have answers yet. Yes, of course, I won't oppose that. What I meant is talking about practical innovation. So the things that reach the people out there, the people that you meet when you go outside your house. So, for example, the smartphones or the algorithms that are already in place when a computer needs to decide whether to give you a credit or not, those things. I think the advancements of science are left for universities to teach to their students but what I meant with education is the practical things. And another remark to Mr. Hemel. You have been talking about the Cyber Arms Convention. I agree to that. And just to reflect that we see military forces all over the globe, including the German military forces, creating so-called cyber branches as an own form of military equal to the army or the marine or the air forces. So it is a topic, and I think that there is conflicts with low thresholds that will be carried out first in the so-called cyberspace. I don't like the word, but there's none better available before using conventional forces, and we need to take care of that.
You opened now two very interesting points: the digital participation and digital human rights, and I really like to touch upon them and start with digital participation, because one question I prepared was regarding the Corona tracing app. Maybe you followed also the discussion, and in the beginning of the discussions in April, I published an article that where I criticized that we talk too much about cybersecurity and data protection. I think it's two very important topics, but we didn't address all the topics around it. For example, digital participation. So if we talk about forcing people to use this app, for example, which I really don't like, but then we need to talk about, have they access to smartphones? Do they have smartphones that are on which this app is working? And now we see that the app is only working on very new smartphones. And also regarding this topic and digital participation, I had the feeling that politicians often had too much expectations regarding technology, that technology might solve all our problems. So I had the feelings they said too often that if all of us are using the tracing app, we will fight the virus back. Do you think there's too much belief in society that technology will solve problems of our societies? This, I call it tech solutionism. Mr. Dayan, you're nodding.
Yeah, there's this famous saying that we overestimate technology in the short term and underestimate it in the long term. And I think that's really true. So what you're talking about is the overestimation in the short term, that there'll be a magical fix. And the smartphone solution for COVID never looked like it was going to be a perfect solution, because the Bluetooth mechanism wasn't designed for this at all. And so it's basically bolting on something that in the end didn't actually work that well. So the issue about digital participation is very important, but I think there was a much more fundamental issue about how well these apps would ever work, even if they were widely adopted.
Yeah, but I think it's a really important question. I agree. We underestimate that in the long term and overestimate in the short term. But the question is really one of society. So it is really the question, if we are heading towards a more and more digitized society, in which kind of society do we wish to live? And can you hear me? Yes. And so the point is that in this moment, even in Germany, we exclude 20% of people from the Corona app because they don't have it available. If we look at other countries, it may be even more. But we have also the other side. For example, the use of smartphones and of banking, digital banking, is much more widespread in some African countries than in Europe, due to other reasons. We know that. But the point is, what exactly do we want to have as digital human rights? What is it? Is the right of access? I also would say I have the right of my own data, because if we talk about data mining, this is like the industry of mining and raw materials. So I think we have to study what kind of ethics do we have there. Well, really, it's a challenge. And the minimum thing we can say, if I would find some gold dust in the earth in my own garden, I would not know how to get that dust into real gold. So I need somebody who knows the technology. But what happens right now is that we, as the producers of data, let me say, who are really making them, we leave them completely to the companies, which means that the country having gold mines does receive zero, and the exploitation company receives 100. This is not right. So we have to find solutions over there. I think there can be some solutions, but the first thing before finding solutions is to address the issue and to say, here we have also an issue of justice and of participation, and in a very, very general way, because funny enough, maybe you have observed that, the value of the American Stock Exchange increased, but mainly due to the 5 big digital companies. Otherwise, it would have gone down in the Corona crisis. So what does it mean in the sense of equality of chances, of equality of access, and all these matters? I think the matter of human rights, digital human rights, is really of crucial importance.
And before I give to you, Mr. Gernler, I really invite our guests to ask questions. Please type them in the panel on the right side. You can also type them in German, and I would translate them. But Mr. von Gernler, you wanted to add something.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to add two aspects. Mr. Hemel just stressed the mining image, and I like that very much, because it connects to me to a citation or a quotation I heard a few years ago. The person has died already. It's Hans-Peter Uhl, is former member of parliament, and despite other views that I didn't share with him, he coined one word in parliament. He talked about neo-colonialism. So it's colonialism with other means, not the traditional mining, but the mining for data and the control that is being forced upon us. And the second remark I want to make is on the Corona app. I want to add another aspect. We had the discussion on the factual level already. So how the app is working or not working, or why people with older smartphones are excluded. But in terms of, or with regard to the education topic that we had earlier, I very, very much like the process that spun around the Corona app, because what happened is that huge parts of the German society, because it affects nearly everyone, engaged into the discussion, jumped in, and for example, discussed the pros and cons of central versus decentral storage of data, and the privacy issues, and the issues of equality, and so on. And it not only was a hypothetical discussion, but it really led to factual changes in the actual doing of the app. And I think this is a great success and the first step in digital education.
Yeah, thanks. I think so too. Ms. Gorecki, do you want to add something? No? Okay. The topic of... Yeah.
So I completely agree that it was excellent to have this sort of discussion. On the other hand, the actual choice of centralized versus decentralized in the end was made by Apple and Google, not by other companies, other countries. Because so in Britain they tried to have a centralized app, they couldn't do it. They couldn't create it because essentially the technology didn't support it. And Apple and Google decided what the answer was going to be. Everybody else had to follow suit.
Well, you're right. You can't win them all.
But I would like to put this discussion in a more general perspective, because one of the typical questions of the digital age, in my eyes, is the search for the right place of responsibility. We are discussing it now only between central and decentralized, but we have it also in the companies. If 20 years ago, people have been proud to be, let me say, a leader, a boss in a head of department, and he or she said, well, I know everything my people do. If today a head of department would say, I know everything my employees, my colleagues do, you would say, well, this is a very old-fashioned company, or your span of leadership is 2 or 3 people, because we cannot know that. So we have to define the right place of decisions. This is also interesting, because it means, in a sense, something like a democratic revolution, which can be part of the digital age. It's not completely democratic, of course, but it means that we cannot take responsibility for every decision in our field, in our organization, in our group, in our department. We have to trust. So this means we have to build context of trust. And this context of trust, of course, is fragile. It is in danger because we are human beings. We make errors. Sometimes we cheat others. So this is a difficult thing. So what we need then is we need a digital society which also evolves into the direction of a society of trust. But a society of trust, of course, must be worth it. If we build a society of trust with a lot of methods of cheating and deceiving and taking unilateral benefits, this will not work. But I think it is an interesting point to understand that the digital age gives us a new chance of asking what kind of society is the society we would like to live in? Where is the right place for a decision? How can we share justice and how can we build up a house of trust, so to say? I think this is interesting, both for companies as for states and even for the global civil society.
Thank you. And I'd like to touch upon the topic of power of companies later on, that the topic Mr. Dayan just opened. But I'd like to go back to digital human rights. Professor Hemel, you mentioned them, and you said we need to talk about digital human rights. And I'd like to ask you, do we need new human rights, or shouldn't we just apply human rights to the digital sphere more?
Of course, this is a good expression. We can apply human rights to the digital sphere. That's perfectly okay. I would be happy with this. Nevertheless, I think in some occasions we really do have new issues. Look, for example, at your healthcare data. Now, if you go to a doctor and you have an X-ray photograph, who owns the data? Well, the producer of the machine, the doctor, the healthcare system, or you yourself. So I think if I would say my healthcare data are part of my personality, they are my data. I cannot even sell them, as I cannot sell really my hand or my food or something. This is a shift in the discussion, because then we have an extended conception of what a human person is. You would say, well, I cannot steal your healthcare data because they are yours anyway. This is, of course, a legal concept, it is a social concept, but it means that in some cases, beyond the necessary application of human rights to the digital field, we do have also new questions. So I think the idea of digital human rights can be of interest.
Okay, I think the topic of ownership of data or usage rights on data is a big topic, and maybe too much for this evening. So does anyone like to add something on the topic of human rights and digitalization? Yeah, Mr. Gernler.
Thank you. I'm rather optimistic on this topic in the long run, because we also, well, we as Germans, for example, have a long way, a nice history of, for example, the German Constitutional Court forming this law of, I don't know how to translate it exactly, self-informational governance in 1984 already, which is an ironic notion, because 1984 is also the title of that famous novel. So and other things that you touched, for example, the digital X-ray photograph. I think you can cover it already by the notion of human dignity, because if I remove this photograph and post it online, then I'm touching your dignity, basically. And I think the General Data Protection Act in the European Union would see it as the same case. But I agree that we need to further flesh out and define and apply the existing regulations, perhaps add new ones where they are missing, to this new digital field that unfolds in front of us.
Mm-hmm. But let me add one sentence, if I may. What you say is completely consensus in European societies. But we are not only, we are in a conflicting world sometimes. And I think, especially in the digital age, we have to see the big difference between a very much commercialized approach to the digital world in the United States, a very much state-based approach in China, just to give some examples, and a person-based approach in Europe. You mentioned the data data protection law. And I think this is worth mentioning, and it's even worth developing much further. What could be a person-centered, a human-centered development of rights and of duties in this field? It's also a matter of duties, but this is something where it could be unique in the European tradition, which is a tradition of placing the human person not so much in dependency of the family, of the state, of organizations, but really gives a central value to the human person. And this is for me the background when I'm talking about digital human rights. Of course, it deserves more development, sure.
I agree. I just said in the long run. So I'm not claiming that in the current situation we are optimal.
Mr.
The one issue here is the extent to which people actually cherish those digital human rights that I think we all agree are so important. So people are it seems that people are very willing to sign over their data. So it's not that you don't get anything in return, because we get the ability to have tailored search results and news feeds and stuff like that that we all seem to like. And so even given knowledge of the potential dangers of giving over data to some of these large corporations, people seem to do it surprisingly willingly. And so that, I think, is going to be an issue that perhaps it comes down again to another educational issue too.
Well, but wait a minute. I completely agree on the one side. On the other side, I must say that we, in ethics, in value questions, we always have to see both sides, the individual and the social part. If I have children, but they are grown up. But if I would have a small child, and I would say, okay, now we throw the dices, and I sell you my child. This is crazy. You would say this is never possible. This is out of reach. So sometimes we, as a society, we put boundaries to actions of people where we say, okay, this action is not able of a human consent, so it is void, it is nil. And I think this is important. And in this new digital field, we sometimes forget about that. We need to develop a new social consciousness of ethical values and, let me say, ethical minimum standards concerning photos, concerning hate speech, concerning behavior. And this is something which is part of the human being. And we need, at this point, individuals, but we also need the legislator and we need institutions. So we need really a joint effort for doing this. But then it seems to be natural. Oh, it's clear. I cannot go to my neighbor's house and steal something because I simply like it. So this is a social development of values and even of, maybe sometimes even of implicit laws, so to say. But this is a long way to go. We have to discuss that. We are now still in the bonanza period of the digital age, and I'm quite sure that we will have much stricter limits to what is allowed and what is not allowed in the future. But it is an evolutionary path.
Thank you. If I may, I'd like to take Ms. Gorecki more to the discussion. So, Professor Hemel, you just mentioned we need more consciousness regarding our photos and everything, and I would say more consciousness regarding our data and information we produce in general. So, Ms. Gorecki, you work a lot with data with which AI systems are trained, and I'd like to know from you, should we differentiate more between algorithmic systems and data? And there's this famous saying, garbage in, garbage out. So how can we ensure that the data we use to train the systems is ethical? So we want to talk about ethics. How can we ensure ethic data?
So maybe starting at your first point, so whether data and algorithms are something different, kind of, or whether they are kind of mingled. I would say, well, basically, you have a data set, for example, and then you train an algorithm on it in order to get a model that then interacts in the world, or that is then applied in a specific context. So we definitely can separate data and algorithms, and we can also, for some cases, separate the biases that come with the data or with the algorithm. So we are able to identify, for example, we had before the the problem of face recognition, that if we train an algorithm only on, let's say, white people in a specific age with a specific gender, then we might end up having a lot of errors for people with that are, for example, Black or very old, very young. So people with different characteristics regarding their physical appearance. So we can identify specific sources of bias in the data and in the algorithm. So in the algorithm, it will rather be something like the evaluation, the target value, how misclassifications or misdecisions are, how costly they are. But at the same time, we have like an interaction between data and algorithms. So they will both also interact and create new kind of biases. So that's for the first part. What can we do to like ensure ethical decisions, or what can we ensure to have ethical data? I guess an important point is to, regarding the data, to look at, or regarding the actual task that we have at hand, what kind of problem are we trying to solve here, and which aspects do we need to take this decision? So which features, for example, from the people, which do we need age in order to decide whether someone gets a loan or not? Do we need their zip code in order to know whether the person gets a loan or not? Those are both, might be both features that can represent, for example, from which socioeconomic group you are coming from, or how much money you might have already like summed up in the course of your life. So I think a very important point of this aspect is this idea of feature selection and the idea of which people do we reach within our data collection. That might be 2 points, but they will not ensure that the decisions at the end will be fair. So there are, even without bad intentions, even without or with finding seemingly neutral features, there might come up new biases due to the interaction between algorithm and data, and then the model and the society that decisions are made upon.
If I say very generalized, that the more data I have, or with the more data I train my system, the less bias I have in a system. Don't we maybe have then problems with collecting data, especially when it comes to data protection rights?
So maybe I have first a question back. So you were asking like whether more data is always better? Was that like your first question?
No, if I assume this, so if I need more data to train my systems better, to make it more fair, for example, but then we have here in Europe like the ruling that we are just allowed to collect data, especially personal data, which where we have a need for, which we are allowed to use. So sometimes it can be necessary to train systems, I think, to ask for the gender of a person, but you're not legally allowed to collect this this data. So do you think there might be a problem regarding digital or data privacy laws and the need to train our systems better?
Well, sorry.
Please.
Go ahead if you want to. Okay. So first of all, I think the main problem of for example, having sex or age as a specific feature and using it or asking for it and having it available as a feature, that will be problematic with the data protection law. I totally see that. On the same time, just deciding not to use specific features will not be sufficient. So, for example, with sex, we often have also other features that are highly correlated with this feature, and then if you like we cannot prevent having sexual disparities or racial disparities just by not having this feature within our data, because there will be correlations between those features, and then we can, like, saying it in an evil way, we could first predict what this feature would be and then use it, which is obviously like not the way to do it, but at the end, not using those features is not the solution to, or is not the solution at the end.
Yes, I would like to add something, because we have here really a bunch of questions. The first thing is, the important issue is to have a public debate, a strong public debate on these issues. That's exactly what we are doing tonight. So this is one point in our favor. The second thing is, even with the European data protection law, we have the idea coming from the medical field, the idea of the informed consent. So this means you have the information, and having the information, you say, yes, I like to share these data. By the way, this already is getting ground in many, many applications, you know, that on the social networks, even if we click them through. But here again, we come to the political issue. And for example, just to give you one example, if a company would say, I don't, by giving a click, you share the broadest possible information sharing, you could also say, no, by the first click, it is the most narrow possible information sharing. So this is already a difference, which of course we could discuss publicly. And the second thing is, you talk about a dilemma, and a dilemma is we have a moral conflict, and a moral conflict gains. It is not always easy to solve it, and sometimes it cannot be solved, but it can be addressed. It can be made transparent, and this is something which is part of fairness, making these things transparent and say, yes, we do have a challenge. This is the way we try to solve it. Do you have any better solution? And the third thing is, I still think digital inclusion and digital participation is a matter of discussing the relationship of power between the consumer and end user and the digital company. If I take my car and go from A to B, this is a simple thing. In China, you cannot sell any cars without giving your mobility data to the state. Okay, this is not the same in Europe, but nevertheless, if I use the data, I generate the data, and the car producer has these data, and Tesla is so valuable because they have so many data, then of course I said, what is my share in that? And here I think we could find other creative ways. In my eyes, for example, we could discuss publicly if the use of data generated by myself is not something which I would have the right to give into a public institution. In my eyes, it is something I call the cooperative, the public data cooperative, so to say. So we have that in Germany with the GEMA, with the VG Wort, which means these are institutions where I give certain rights voluntarily. I'm not obliged to, but I do it if I like to. And then in the end of the year, I get a little share of the income generated by playing music or by publishing text and so on. And why should we not apply this same kind of law to our data? So I would give my data to such a cooperative, public cooperative, and the only thing we should then have is a legislator who says, well, if you company wants to, if you want to use these data, you have to make a contract with the cooperative. And so in the end, you will have, as a user, you will have not a lot, but some euro in the end of the year for generating these data. This, of course, is not a big step, but it is already something where we could say, okay, you have a little bit of more equality or a better proportion between the power of the end user and the power of the digital companies. This is at least one direction. But the most important thing in all these questions is to have a strong public debate. This is a free society, a democratic society, because in some societies the free debate is not so much encouraged, to be polite.
Thank you, Professor Hemel. Mr. Dayan?
Quickly, as you say, it's not the case that more data is always better. A nice example of that is the Microsoft chat bot, which then became this sort of awful racist bot as a result of training on the data, on the increasing data that was being provided by people. And then there are other cases where the sort of path dependence I mentioned in my opening remarks, where particularly algorithms which are responsible for getting their own data, can get sort of stuck in ruts, and they get more and more and more sure about what we would then consider to be unfair or unreasonable characteristics. So I think that, in a sense, more data are not always better, and that's one of the difficulties that algorithms certainly face.
Mr. von Gernler, go on.
Thank you. I'd like to make a comment to the informed consent notion, because informed consent always implies that the person who is informed is also able to make a sensible decision about the information he or she gets. But I think this is not the case, because if I ask you, would you please tell me the last 7 songs you played in your MP3 player or on Spotify, or would you please tell me the last 7 likes you did on Facebook? Would that be harmful? I think many people out there will still say, no, that's not harmful, not as far as I can see. But if you remember the Cambridge Analytics case, it's not completely cleared up how powerful that system was really, and if it really influenced the voting in the US. But what we know is that if you know a person's Facebook's likes or what Spotify does is you collect about what they're listening to at the moment, then you can infer in which mood they are, where they are, and perhaps with a more refined model, you can also say, okay, this guy, I'm very provocative now, listens to country music, so it's basically a redneck living in Texas and whatever. But there are more finer grained possibilities of inferring data, and I think there is no informed consent in the age of machine learning. And even though even when you assume the machine will make a wrong kind of consequence, then you're still being judged, and you have no you're not aware that you're being judged, and you have no means of opposing that judgment, because it's running in the hidden, in the background, and you don't even see it.
Yes.
Thank you. May I add a question to this, this informed consent? And when we talk about ethics, so you now said that we can't have an informed, or can make an informed consent to systems that are like machine learning systems. But I would argue that even if I click on a cookie banner on the web, this isn't a really informed consent, because I need to read too much. So there's a German activist for civil liberties, Katharina Nokkunen. She wrote a book and made a test by herself and tried to order a pizza. So she went on the website pizza.de and read all the consent and the privacy policies, and then wanted to pay with PayPal, and had to read all of this, the privacy policies. And she said she would die of hunger because it took too much time to read all of this. So I'd like to hear from you, also from this ethical perspective. Can we really have a informed consent in the digital world?
Yes, I think we have to distinguish. Of course, you are completely right. You cannot do that process for everything. Remember, the notion of informed consent comes from the medical sphere. For example, before an operation, a surgical intervention. So we talk about what we call decisions of a certain importance, and this is exactly the thing in the digital world. Clicking a cookie or clicking a consent to general conditions is so easy, and it's not so important for us. This is the important thing. Human beings are quite good in setting priorities, at least normally. So we say, it's not my priority to read all these instructions and bylaws and so on. I simply want to eat a pizza. Yes, sure, for sure, because we are rational in that sense that we say we pursue our path. I'm hungry, I want to eat a pizza, click, click, and I get it. This is, of course, a difference. But informed consent, therefore, means in decisions of a certain ponderance, of a certain importance. These decisions also exist, for sure. But we have to discuss where does it start? Is it the same for everybody? Probably not. and so on. So I think these are things where we can distinguish. The second thing is we need a public debate, and sometimes we have a fine line between dictatorship and let me say a caring state. Sometimes, for example, some practices, rightly so, are not allowed in business life, in other fields. So here the only thing to mitigate that is the public debate and say, this is what we want together. This is where we really make a line. And we are making progress, to be honest. 5 or 10 years ago, hate speech was something deeply accepted. 5 or 10 years ago, the darknet was a place of the anarchical liberty of the internet. You know, there are also other things like arms dealing and trafficking and pornography and all this kind of stuff. So we are a little bit more critical. We have learned more. We are able to learn. But the point is, for drawing conclusions, we really need a method, and we need also an ethical method. And this ethical method really exists. It's what we say, the balancing of goods. So if I may explain that in a sentence, just imagine you have an argument to decide.
Professor Hemel, I think you're moving your phone a bit too much or something, because there are always breaks in your voice.
Okay.
Maybe
I'm really sorry. I don't move it anymore, but it breaks nevertheless sometimes. Well, let me try to make this last point of this issue. We talked about the informed consent, that it needs a certain height of decision, a certain, let me say, importance of the decision. And then the second thing is that we need a method of balancing out the ethical goods. So we have on one side the negative things, and on the other side the positive things. And there are even mathematical methods where we can find out our priorities, our possibilities. And you can train that. So that is why I am very much in favor of an ethical training, not only for the society as such, but also, let me say, for programming engineers, for software engineers, because it is not so difficult. We can learn to be ethical even without having the moral finger and this kind of heavy stuff. We can learn that. There are methods. And this is an optimistic, let me say, conclusion, that we can learn more and find out what is good for us as individuals, as groups, and as a society.
Okay. Mr. Dayan?
Just want to say that I think that is very optimistic, and I think one can hope. But the trouble is that the sort of unintended consequences, as Mila says, you apply your algorithms to your data. You can be perfectly ethical in the way you're thinking about the algorithm yourself. It seems completely unbiased. The data set, you just pull a huge data set, and maybe you believe that the more data you have, the better. And then you train this in what looks to you like an unbiased way. You generate something which doesn't work in that way that you think, and in the end leads to a very biased outcome. So again, it comes back to the issue of understanding that if, from technologically, we don't understand, we don't, as Mila says, we have difficulties in understanding how to repair the fairness in these systems. Then you can sign your ethical oath, but in fact we can't. That's not actionable because we don't know the circumstances under which we're really breaking it.
Well, just very short, I completely agree. But this is my initial remark about the human catastrophic competences. We very often do not know what happens, but we are quite good then later on to find for the muddling through. Human beings are relatively well prepared, I guess. Sorry for the short intervention.
Okay, and Mr. van Gernler? Yes,
thank you. I want to bring up an old idea and set it in new context. And the idea is from Professor Lawrence Lessig that many of you might know, even though you don't know the name, because he's the one behind the Creative Commons license. And amongst many other very, very small things that Lessig said is the one quotation that says, "Code is law." And he said it not in the age of artificial intelligence, but long before. And it was more like a comment on the upcoming internet industry, I believe. But I think it gains a whole new quality in the artificial intelligence age, and I want to stress that whenever you are entitled by law to some right that you have against the company, if the company's website doesn't have a button that allows you to actually fulfill this right and do this action, then code is law. It prevents you from having an easy way of getting what you're entitled to. And of course, you can try and see how you can call up Amazon.com. You don't call them, they call you, right? So if they don't want to, then they won't call you. And if their algorithm doesn't see a button or a pathway that gives you this certain right, it's not so relevant what coded law is saying about your case.
I would add to this. I would add to this or extend it a little bit and even argue that the cartographies that, for example, we then later use for, well, I start anew. Maybe just imagine that you have like a box that you have where you have to fill out, for example, your gender, your address, your family status, something like this on the website. Then this data might later be used, for example, to train an algorithm to decide something. And the point I'm trying to make is that those cartographies or those things that you can choose on the website, so adding to this idea of code becomes law, also become normative. So they will also decide like which genders are there actually, which button can I actually click, and they will define like how our models will on which features they will take decisions upon and how they which kind of model of the world they have, because those cartographies cannot be changed by the user. So the user often doesn't have the option to add another answer to one of those multiple choice boxes or something like this.
Thank you.
Which strengthens the idea of code becoming law.
Okay, thank you. We have now 15 minutes left in our discussion, and I'd like to touch upon a topic we mentioned several times. Ms. Gorecki, is ethics part of your students' master's program?
It isn't obligatory, but well, it is by now because one of our professors decided to use some of her lectures to talk about fairness in machine learning and ethical decisions in machine learning. So it is part of our studies, but as well, I think there are a lot of new seminars and new groups, new professorships that are offering seminars in this direction, lectures in this direction. So I think also driven by the discussion about the Cyber Valley, a lot of those courses of aiming for interdisciplinary discussions, discourse between students are actually like developing at the University of Tübingen. So yeah, it is a part of my studies.
Okay, thank you. And do you think it needs to be a required seminar in computer science? And what do you think about an ethical codex for computer scientists?
I think it would definitely be beneficial if every one of the students of computer science or machine learning has at least one seminar taking like the broader consequences of our work into focus, to discuss it at some point of your studies. I think that's very important. So I would definitely argue for making it a required part of everyone's studies in computer science. Also because, especially like now in the international masters, I kind of realized how different people are approaching technology or the development of new technology. And I think it's very important to also internationally have a discussion about it. So that I think that would be great. And I'm in favor of an ethical codex actually. So yeah, I don't see a point in not signing one or not having one, formulating one.
Thank you. Mr. von Gernler, you as the German Informatics Society, you published a draft for ethical codex. Maybe you can tell us a bit about it.
Yes, that's I was eager to answer on this question. Thank you. It's not only a draft, but last summer we renewed the ethical guidelines the German Informatics Society had already, and made them fit to new developments in society and in technology. And as far as we're now speaking, I remember the term Hippocratical oath that Professor Hemel was bringing up, and I like this very much. It's not that binding yet, and it's not for the broad public. It's at the moment it's an issue for members of the German Informatics Society, and I think this is way too short. I have a dream, and in my dream, every student, every German-speaking student, no matter in which German-speaking part of Europe, whenever they reach their master's degree or their bachelor's degree or whatever, and they get their diploma, I think they should get a free issue of the ethical guidelines, just as a good measure. Not so much. I think we cannot instantiate some kind of Hippocratical oath yet, but it's a good start, and we're calling them guidelines for a reason. It's not a codex that you strictly have to sign and adhere to in every word, but it's more like it should make you think, and thinking on your own is a very, very valuable asset.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Dayan, what do you think about this topic? Maybe then afterwards, Professor Hemel.
So I think the issue about a codex, I think, is it comes back to the question that I was asking before, which is that we can be ethical about we can sign a declaration of ethics, but in the end, the way that becomes actionable is complicated, because, for instance, the issue of how it is that our algorithms, which look very unbiased, that we create, can never obviously be used they can be used in a way that, even if they use in a way which we intend, they can lead to very unfair consequences. So the coming back to Hippocratic Oath, you're quite right that doctors sign this Hippocratic Oath, because if you step back and look at healthcare in a country like America, for instance, as a system, it's clear that it's not only being used in the service of patients and of healthcare. It's a huge industry which has very substantial financial implications for all concerned. And so even the Hippocratic Oath that individual doctors sign leads in a system to something which does not serve the public, and does not serve individuals in the way that we intend. And I think the same would be true. The danger is the same, of course, is true for a codex, even worse when we understand certain.
Thank you. And Mr. Hemel.
Yes, thanks a lot. Well, it's not very surprising that I'm in favor of such an ethical approach. I think a codex must be a living codex, of course, and we have many codes, but I think we are converging towards a common code of conduct, a common code of programming, a common code of AI. I think the many items we do have on the table, in a way, are converging. But the most important thing, in my eyes, is exactly what you say: give good reasons. Ethical reasoning is something which we have to learn. We want to have good reasons why are you doing this, and then we have an answer because, and so on. And is it a good reason? No, it's not a good reason. I'm getting drunk every evening. Why? Because it's so funny. Well, but did you think about the consequences, and so on and so on? So this is everyday talk, but we have to apply this level of ethical expertise also to the new digital and AI world. And this is why I'm so much in favor of a structured ethical education, also on a university level. Of course, ethical education is not anymore like the indoctrination some people have in mind when they talk about ethics. It's really like finding out good reasons. And here there is one further step which I also would like to address. I discussed in my book difficult approaches to ethics. And whereas I always had a high respect of Kant and the categoric imperative, you should always behave in such a way that your behavior could be a general law and so on. But I must say the applicability to the digital world is a little bit limited because it's too high, it's too abstract. And by the way, it can be also misused, as we can see from some unfair laws, even in our own country several decades before. So it does not work. And the utilitarian approach, which of course this is a long discussion, but it also means the interest of the best benefit of the highest number of people, so to say. But in which horizon, in judgment, which perspective of power is behind. So in the end, I come to what we propose here also from the Global Ethics Institute, these a little bit of common values in an Aristotelian, let me say, line, to say have some basic values like humanity, like justice, like truth, like non-violence, like partnership, and you really can have an open discussion on how to go ahead. And this is why I say we do need a general criterion. This is also, let me say, the concluding line for my argument in the book, that we need to have the discussion: does a certain digital application, a digital program, increase humanity or decrease humanity? Does it promote human behavior or inhibit or make impossible or block human behavior? There will be discussion because people see things in a different way. But at least it means, yes, we do need an ethical education also on university level, and as a part of the simply of the professional baggage, professional luggage of each person dealing with AI and well, the digital applications.
Thank you. And even though I have still a lot of questions, and I really hope that we can go on with this discussion maybe someday in Tübingen when I come back to this wonderful city. But I'd like to give you my last questions, or there are 2 questions for the last 7 minutes we have. So I think this discussion, and I really thank you for that, was very positive, and I really like that. So my last question for you is, what is your biggest hope regarding technology and the digital age? What do you think, what kind of problems we might solve with technology? Can we be better humans, better societies? And because I'm involved here in the political dialogue in Berlin, I really like to know from your point of view, with your expertise, what should politicians and civil society actors focus on when we talk about ethics and decision making? So, who would like to start?
Well, I can start if you are still reflecting. I think we have one common ground. We have different religious traditions, we have different humanistic traditions, but we do have, in the meantime, United Nations, and we have the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And it is not by chance that this starts with zero hunger. Zero hunger means we talk about a condition of, at the moment, 700 million people, and by in the coming 5 or 6 months, probably 800 million people, also due to the corona crisis. So I think the basic human rights must be fulfilled. So this is why I say the 70 SDGs should be the guideline for everything we do, because this is the simple human condition to live a decent life, and do that, secondly, in a safe environment, because otherwise we all cannot survive. So these are the 2 things. Let me say the zero hunger, which also means digital farming and good application in there, and the other, the digital applications, of course, as one step out of many steps in fighting climate change. These are my 2 big points.
Thank you. Mr. von Gernler.
Thank you. My big hope would be to get a better alignment of goals. We heard earlier from Peter Dayan that the system does not work in favor of the people. And I think what we see with social media today is a dilemma. Humans are social beings, and they like this exchange, and they need it, and in times of corona, perhaps even more. But the system is run by companies that have other interests than the human in first place using it. They're not the users, but the used people. And whenever we manage to get a better alignment of those goals, we also get a better working, for example, social media, but it's not limited to that example. And I'm not fairly sure how to get there, but you have been asking for what I hope, and this is what I'm hoping.
Thank you. Ms. Gorecki, you want to be next?
Okay, yeah, sure, I can go ahead. So I'm definitely also hoping for a good alignment of goals, but what I would like to extend, or what is maybe at least from my current perspective, a very important goal for me is to enable everyone to participate in this development and in the digital transformation, and also, yeah, also to integrate or to have more diverse teams that develop the algorithms and that develop models that are applied in the world, because I think that this will definitely also change how they are applied and where they are applied, and that this will somehow serve for a better or more beneficial application of AI systems.
Thanks a lot. And Mr. Dayan.
I definitely agree with all of these things that have been said. I also really enjoyed the debate. I think my hope or my reflection is on the power that the huge amount of information that's available, that has never been available before in such an easy way, will give to the development of new knowledge, which then can be spread in this fair way that we've been talking about. So if I think even when I was when I was young, you could go to a library and get books, it's a fantastic resource. But now, just by a few clicks on the computer, you can get information which would be impossible to have access to. So that is going to dramatically accelerate the advance. It's very absolutely critically important that this be spread fairly in the way that we've been described. But in terms of the speed of advance that we can have, it really is going to be unparalleled, and that's certainly my hope for the future.
Okay, thanks a lot to all the four of you for participating in this discussion. I really, really enjoyed it. And as I said, I'd really like to talk with you more, maybe in November when I'm back in Tübingen for a visit. And thanks to all the participants who joined our discussion this evening. And thank you to the World Ethics Institute and the German Informatics Society who made this dialogue possible. And I really hope that we will go on with this dialogues. And as all of you said, this is so important that we have a diverse dialogue and talk about this more and more, because it impacts the lives of every one of us and every day more and more. So thanks for joining me here in the discussion, and I wish you all a wonderful evening, and stay healthy, stay safe, and goodbye. Thank you.
Thanks to you too.
Thank you.